Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I wanted to cover a game that I've been wanting to talk about on my channel for a while now, Chernobylite. So this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't played it yet and you're wondering if you should, then this video is for you. Chernobylite is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi adventure game developed by the Farm 51. Yes, the same Farm 51 that developed World War III, a game I covered about 2 weeks ago, and a game that I personally despise for various reasons. Go watch that video if you're interested. Now, I mentioned World War III and my disdain for it to point out something a bit strange. So you have two games that both came out fairly recently, made by the same developer, and one is a complete dumpster fire, and the other is really close to being a masterpiece. I'm going to be very forward here and say that I love this game. The roughly 40 hours or so I spent in Chernobylite wasn't just a game for me, rather it was an experience, something I'll remember for years to come, and I'll definitely replay it at some point in the future. I first went into Chernobylite not knowing what to expect. On the surface, it looked kind of like a Stalker clone, and to that, I will say this. If you're going into Chernobylite expecting an off-brand Stalker 2, don't. This game is not like Stalker, though there are some similarities, emphasis on some. Chernobylite puts you in the shoes of the protagonist Igor, a man haunted by visions of his fiancée Tatiana, who disappeared 30 years ago during the events of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear disaster, under suspicious circumstances. He's come to the radioactive exclusion zone to try to find her and uncover clues about the nature of her disappearance. During the course of the game, you will encounter multiple enemies in the form of the NAR, a paramilitary organization that is taking control over the zone for reasons that you'll find out later in the game. You also come to fight these mutated creatures called shadows, but that's all I'm going to say there to avoid spoilers. Throughout the entire game, you'll routinely encounter random stalkers, individuals that live in or explore the zone illegally, all of which are often persecuted by the NAR. These stalkers can often help you by giving you quests, trading, offering unique dialogue options, or even becoming a part of your crew that you get to send back to your hideout, which brings me to the first big thing that I love about this game, the companions. The way Chernobylite does companions is by far the best I've seen in any game recently. They aren't just these dumb, static characters that follow you around the zone. They're people with their own unique motivations, goals, outlooks and opinions, and hardships. The game really makes you either feel for or against these characters, depending on what's going on. There was one character in particular that I grew to despise midway through the game, but then came to somewhat respect and understand later on, even if I didn't agree with him most of the time. I still kind of liked him as a character. Another had a particular catchphrase delivered expertly by his voice actor that I grew to really love. At the end of the game, I grew to love almost all the characters in one way or another. Even the characters I hate, I still love in that they have a good story behind them and they're very well written. They're memorable. The game does a fantastic job of this, with most of them having a lot of depth and backstory, giving them all their own biases and reactions to everything you do. On top of this, their reactions aren't just in what they say or just a simple dialogue option, but even their actions, as if you upset a companion one too many times by giving it maybe that you don't give them enough food, if you give someone else too much food or favoritism, or you just make choices that they don't agree with. They'll eventually choose to stop working with you, which can potentially have huge implications later on in the game. The other thing I liked about the companions is that they weren't just useless. Like I said, they don't just follow you around or sit at your base all day guarding nothing. At the beginning of every mission, you're greeted with a menu screen where you can select who does what. You can have your companions rest, go on a mission for you in an attempt to gather supplies or fight a monster, or scout out an important story location so that you have an easier time going through it when you get around to it. Their success on said missions will be based on their health, what type of gear you choose to equip them with, and their disposition towards you. You can send them on missions and they actually go and do them. They actually have an effect on the rest of the world. And a lot of the times they'll bring you back some loot, or sometimes they might come back wounded and then you have to help heal them. It's a pretty cool mechanic. Another thing to note with this game is, at no point did I feel like I was being rushed to do the main quest like I did in a game like Fallout 4, for example. There's definitely a sense of urgency in the story, but also a sense of kind of careful preparation and planning being essential, and the game rewards you for taking it slow and just exploring the different environments and areas, while at the same time not making it feel too grindy or mandatory. You can kind of play this game how you want. You can rush through certain areas, or you can look at every little detail and explore every little corner. The planning section of this game comes in the form of a base building mechanic that allows you to customize the hideout Igor and his companions will reside in for the duration of your playthrough. Well, it's not anything super crazy or extensive, it does give you a nice bit of customization and immersion, making you feel like you're actually a part of the world as you build beds, light fixtures, walls, crafting stations, and even little farms to gather resources from. It really gives off the sense that you're planning a real expedition into the zone rather than just going on a screen and selecting a level, but it's not too complicated or hard to learn either. It's quite intuitive. On top of the well written characters, interactivity, and base building, the visuals of this game are stunning. I had read that the developers actually took trips to the exclusion zone and laser scanned a lot of the buildings into the game, and it shows. The Chernobyl exclusion zone being a real place actually is reflected in game, and there are several locations that are one-to-one recreations of their real-life counterparts. The Kapachi Kindergarten, I think, is the one that really stood out to me the most. If you go and look this up online, you can see that it looks exactly the same as it does in game. Now, the levels themselves are fairly small. You won't find any massive open areas, but where this game lacks in scale, it makes up more in the level of detail. Every single room in the Chernobylite feels like it was once lived in. Even the outside areas just feel real, with vegetation climbing up the sides of the buildings. A common complaint I have for a lot of games nowadays is how often they try to sell the idea of being in a massive city or a forest environment, but yet they have a real lack of trees, structures, or details. You know, maybe they have the buildings, but they're mostly empty, or maybe they have a few trees, but there's not a lot of bushes or shrubs on the ground. This is not an issue with Chernobylite. One of the things the developers have said is they wanted to have either a big game that kind of wasn't very detailed, or they wanted to have a smaller game that was hyper detailed. And they really went for smaller, but loads and loads of detail. Every single area has a level of attention to it that will make you swear in some cases it was a photo of the real location. Speaking of photos, this game has a photo mode that I just could not stop myself from using. I have over 100 photos in a folder that I just kept on taking. I mean, like I said, the visuals are stunning. So I've talked a lot about that and the overall setup of the game, but what about the gameplay itself? It's satisfying for the most part. The game could be classed as an FPS, but in reality, this isn't a game where you're going to shoot your way out of every situation, and in fact, more often than not, you're going to find it's better off to not do so, and to just hide and sneak around rather than getting into these massive gunfights as your character actually loses mental stability if he kills human beings, as he's not some bloodthirsty killer, and he's not even a trained soldier. He's just an old scientist trying to find his missing fiancée. He doesn't want to kill people, and this is reflected nicely in the interactions between Igor and the other characters. Now, the game does give you an option to do stealth takedowns, which is quite cool as you can sneak around enemies, set up traps and distractions to draw their attention, and then move in for the kill. Or, if you choose to upgrade your skills, just a simple chokehold that knocks them out that you can get fairly early into the game. Kind of like in the Metro series, but with a lot less focus on the actual killing. It adds a new level of gameplay and immersion not seen in a lot of other games. Now, I do have a few gripes, however. And I will say, this game is not perfect. Chernobylite has a dynamic weather system which, while cool, one of the weather options is this weird green fog that I feel takes a lot away from the visuals and obscures your vision so much so that oftentimes characters will tell you to look at something in the distance and then the camera will move to it, but you literally can't see it because that dynamic fog just happens to be there at that time and it's completely random. And then your character will say that he can see said thing, but you physically can't. So it can be really immersion breaking at times, and this happens more than once. The other visual issue I have is a glitch related to the screen size that is beyond infuriating. There's this one enemy you encounter in the game that shoots a sort of ranged slime attack at you, and I found that when I was hit by said attack, 80 to 90% of the time, my screen did this weird thing where it shrunk, and then the bottom right portion of it was really dark, but not totally black. Sometimes the colors would even get distorted. I don't know how this bug hasn't been caught and corrected by now, as this game has been out for a couple of years, so that's slightly concerning. I do play on kind of a funky resolution, so maybe it's because of that, but I don't know. The only way to fix this glitch from what I've seen is to back out of the game entirely and then reload your last save, which means not only do you have to back out of the game, but you're also going to lose some progress. And this, I have to say, is probably the worst thing about the game. And Farm 51 really needs to fix this as soon as possible. So aside from visual issues, the audio of this game can be really wonky at times. The mixing is just really weird, with character voices often being super loud, while gun sounds are super quiet. bear in mind, none of the weapons have suppressors on them or anything. They're just really quiet. Like, for example, the AK-47 almost sounds like you're shooting a bow and arrow rather than a fully automatic machine gun, which is strange given how much attention to detail and immersion the rest of the game has. There are also times when the music gets really loud as well, but only on certain levels. I noticed the Red Forest seems to have the biggest problem with that, where the music will just be like overbearingly loud, and I don't know why. It just feels like the audio in this game is all over the place. You've also got a scan tool that you use to look for useful items, and for some reason when you use it and activate the scan, any ambient music that's playing just completely stops until the scan is complete. It only lasts a couple of seconds, but once again, it's kind of immersion breaking. Then there's the voice acting. Now, I chose to play the game on the English setting, and from what I understand, the Russian setting is the default, but I chose English setting because, well, that's what I speak, and the voice actors, for the most part, do a great job. In fact, I even mentioned earlier, the one character, his voice acting is done so well, I often found myself talking to his character just to hear him say a certain catchphrase that I liked. And it makes them really convincing, except, and this is kind of a big exception, Tatiana, who is the main character's fiance, she's like the second main character in the game. And I don't know why, but it almost sounds like her voice actor, the English one, wasn't taking the role super seriously, as she often sounds sarcastic or like she's reading off of a script too much rather than actually acting for a part. And at first I thought that maybe this was intentional because of some other lore implications that we find out later in the game, but it's never actually mentioned or addressed to be that. So I think that this was just not the best acting here. I don't know, maybe I'm being picky. But another thing relating to the voice acting is the hurt sounds. Whenever an NPC gets hurt by a bullet or whatever, they make this grunt sound effect, but there's only like 3 variations of said grunting. So when an NPC gets hit multiple times, especially if you're using that machine gun that, like I said before, has a very quiet shooting sound effect, you just hear this loud grunt, like the same 3 of them over and over again, and it's quite immersion breaking and almost humorous at times. Add to the fact that for some reason the grunting sounds often sound like they're coming from Igor, your player character, and not the NPCs. Yeah, combat can be quite awkward and oftentimes feels more like a drag rather than part of the experience, and it really takes you out of what is otherwise a deep and immersive game. So last but not least, I had some criticisms about the gameplay itself. As I mentioned earlier, there are a few traders you can find, but none of them sell anything useful. There's this one guy that kind of gives you a random mystery box that has random loot in it, and he's kind of cool, but other than that, you can really only just trade with them by exchanging ammo for food, or food for supplies. It's definitely a barter system, there's no money involved, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you have a scanner equipped to you at all times that can show you where valuable loot and materials are. I mean, why trade with these guys if you can just find the stuff yourself in a fairly short amount of time? That being said, however, the traders do offer some funny dialogue and all have unique, often eccentric personalities that I grew to love, and like I said before about the other characters, even the traders are memorable. They're minor characters, but they're memorable enough. And for the most part, they're present in the early game when resources are a lot more scarce, so I can't complain too much there. My biggest issue with gameplay, however, has to be the voices of the past missions. These suck. Voices of the past, they feel more like actual filler than actual objectives, and basically what they have you do is watch a brief vision of Tatiana telling you to go to a level you've probably already been to before for another mission, and then go and find something stupid like a random picture or a statue, which, again, I've often been in the same areas of those same levels before, and then they give you a little backstory on Igor and Tatiana's relationship. There's a lot, in my opinion, of unnecessary dialogue that often just feels forced and awkward. It does serve as part of a larger objective, as once you acquire enough of the pictures or random notes left behind, you do get to enter these really cool, like, flashback spaces, but I won't say too much about those to avoid spoilers, but yeah, they're cool, but the method of getting to those flashbacks could have been done a little bit better, especially because some of them, like I said, you're revisiting the same area multiple times, some of which you may have just been to. And that brings me to my next point. Chernobylite does not have enough levels. Like I said before, most of the levels are fairly small and detailed, but my biggest issue is that there's just not many of them. If memory serves correctly, there's maybe like 5 or 6 different areas you can go to in the open world part of the game, Then there's a final quest area that does take you to a different level, but it still feels a bit lacking in terms of content. That being said, however, the game does receive updates still, and there's an entirely new level coming soon that will add this cooling towers level to the game, and that looks really cool. So I'm really excited for that. I'm hoping that they'll add more levels to it as time goes on than just the cooling towers. Realistically speaking, I feel like they need at least another 3 or 4 levels to make this game feel totally complete. The new cooling tower level is going to have more side missions, and speaking of side missions, the game really does shine here. So obviously you have your main quest, you have the Voices of the Past quest, but you also have these random side missions and these random encounters and events where oftentimes you'll stumble upon something that will give you clues about what's going on in the zone or just add a bit more to the atmosphere. I really like this, and I wish more games would do things like this. Now, that being said, I don't want to spoil too many of them and go into too much detail, but some of them are a bit weird. So there's this one, or there's more than one, there's a couple of them, where you'll stumble upon some dead soldiers killed by something. Again, keeping the spoilers away. Next to these dead soldiers, you would expect to find their guns next to them, right? But you don't. Their guns are just gone. Their ammo's there on their bodies, so that to me implies that they weren't looted by anyone or anything, but they just don't have any guns there. In a game like this that has sort of a heavy emphasis on scavenging, you would expect to find guns next to dead soldiers. So when I look to scavenge the ammo out of those guns, and I can't, it's a little bit weird. I do realize that that's a little bit of a nitpick on my part, though. So overall, I think Chernobylite's a really fun game, and it is well worth the $30, especially considering that the developers, as I said, continue to update it with free content. Despite its flaws, I wanted to say that this is one of the best games I have played in a while, and I think it deserves more attention. I don't know how the Farm 51 managed to screw up so bad with World War III and then make a near masterpiece with this game, so don't let any of the negatives I pointed to dissuade you from giving this game a buy, as most of them, like I've said, are nitpicks. The game's only $30 and goes on sale quite often. It's not like you're going to be paying like $60 for a 30-hour experience or something. Halo Infinite. Most of my complaints were just nitpicks, with my biggest issue by far being that screen glitch. That screen glitch needs to be fixed, and then I would say after that, the audio issues are quite annoying. But if they could fix those two things, add some more levels, I think that this game is the perfect package. Other than those issues, you have an immersive, captivating, well-designed game with interesting characters, which in today's gaming market I think is something that is quite rare. So give this game a try. Thank you for watching, and leave a like on the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you want to see more content. I have all sorts of things coming up in the near future. I have been Broken Circle, and as always, have a great day, and stay safe. Goodbye, guys.